Greetings, my fellow free love sovereign thinkers. This is LO3's newest podcast. My name is Craig, transmitting from the beautiful swampy mangroves of South Florida. And today's date, Wednesday, June 28th, 2017. Yeah, I decided to play the intro. It's a NightRock version called Indifferent, which is from a group called AKnewGod. I always put credit to it. If you want to donate money, I'll put the link up for YouTube, and you can take it all from there. So, yeah, I went to see Wonder Woman last night, finally. And I gotta have to really say is, I enjoyed it. It wasn't a boring film, had a decent story to it. And more of I would say, a classic intake. Because the character, she came out like around the 20s, I believe. Or the 30s, I'm not so sure. But around that time. So, something you could check out. If you haven't seen it yet, do it. And I know a lot of women were like fans of the movie, so always got to have a good token of appreciation when it comes to superhero-related kind of films. Many of them are okay. Others, they did a real nice job. And this one here I recommend it. Good. Give it 3 stars. It's good. Wasn't boring. So, great one-liners, too, about from 2 different worlds. How she met Steve Hauser and all that. So I'm not going to get too, technical on it. But yeah, when you have a chance, check it out. You won't be disappointed. Yeah, so I know I've been had some time off. Do a little relaxing. And just to let you folks know, once again, I'm at CJ's Java Lounge, located at 400 Southwest 1st Avenue, Suite 1, along the New River of Fort Lauderdale. Mom and Pa Coffee Shop. They open around 7 and close around 5, unless until further notice. On Fridays and Saturdays at 7 p.m. So, hey, support the mom and pop facilities, my friends. They're trying to make everything more corporate America as they can. So, I'm going to be mainly talk about what's going on with Trump and Syria. It's like a interesting topic where everyone's like worried about fascistic healthcare. The ACA, Anal Care Act, I call it. If folks actually read that 920-page plus debacle, you'd be scratching your head as well. So they're listening to lobbyist groups, bobbleheads, and Jim Joneses. Start thinking for yourselves. Read, R-E-A-D, or other words, examine these documents. Go to the Library of Congress. They have a lot of merit. But everyone's out there protesting, I need my Obamacare, my ACA, government, please wipe my behind. I am angry at you, you fascistic pigs. Yeah, but how come you do that? Go to the FBI's office? Speaking of fascism, yeah, well, look up Operation Paperclip. How many of the Nazis were hired by J. Edgar Hoover? Jerk off, to be exact. So, all right. Well, without further ado, I'll be focusing more on what's going on with Syria and and something else besides that. So it's mostly Syria. So let's start off for here. Trump threatens war against Syria, Iran, and Russia. Hallelujah. He is my man, my Lord and Savior. I am a patriot by waving that Trump flag. Yeah, yeah, of course. But we all know, many of us know, he's just another pawn of the game, a patsy. But I have to say that. Because everyone has that fetish. They get angry every time the elections come in. The presidential elections. We gotta elect a new king. Come on, peasants, get angry. Yeah. Hillary wouldn't be the same. Isn't all that either. Including feel the hype, Bernie Sanders. Feel the hype. Feel the hype. We hate freedom, but we want free crap. Okay, so this one here is from Another Day in Empire by Kurt Nemo. I always enjoyed his work. Well, they admit it. And it says here, of course, Trump threatens war against Syria, Iran, and Russia. Trump neocon administration is getting ready for war with Iran and Russia. Donald's UN ambassador tweeted last night. Nikki the Prissy Haley. Any further attacks done to the people of Syria will be blamed on Assad, but also on Russia and Iran for supporting him killing his own people. What a scum queen. Can we say that? I'm gonna reply to her right now. Come on. So go to the front line when this occurs. And let's see how. When it's official. When it's official. There. So go to the front line when it's official, Nikki Haley. Now we're going to go to the toilet. You hear her scumbag rhetoric. Garbage. It should be obvious to all, with the exception of starry-eyed alt-writers, that Trump is carrying out the neocon agenda of total war. The White House issued the following. The United States has identified potential preparations for another new chemical weapons attack by the Assad regime that would likely result in the mass murder of civilians, including children. See, they like to use that. Children, do it for the children. As we have previously stated, the United States is in Syria to eliminate the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS. If, however, Mr. Assad conducts another mass murder attack using chemical weapons, he and his military will pay a heavy price. Seymour Hersh writes that Trump ignored important intelligence reports when he decided to attack Syria after he saw pictures of dying children. He fired Tomahawk missiles at the Shayrat Air Base in central Syria in retaliation for an alleged nerve gas attack in Khan Sheikh Town. Trump issued the order despite having been warned by the U.S. intelligence community that it had found no evidence that the Syrians had used a chemical weapon, writes Hersh. I guess it didn't matter whether we elected Clinton or Trump, an officer told him. In other words, the agenda will go forward regardless of what teleprompter reader sits in the Oval Office. That is right. Always something to look at. Pay attention, my friends. And I like this, some of these folks here. In other words, the agenda will go forward regardless of what teleprompter reader sits in the Oval Office. That's how it always works, except they used to use cue cards. Of course. Nice one there, Joe. And this is why you can say this about Donald Trump as well. He's a bend over Bob and proud. In these certain elements, of course. That's why, my friends, you have to observe everything more thoroughly than looking at someone as your Lord and Savior. You're saying, if I don't like Trump, I'm not a patriot? No, I'm not an imperialist. All these people out there, t-shirts with angry, I'm not my president. Hey, as far as I'm concerned, right now, it's not my government. We're a federal corporation. That's not my government. Look it up. I did an episode on that too. That United States is a federal corporation. It's a corporation. So look it up. So I sent to that piece of garbage, Nikki Haley, a piece of my mind. How pathetic she is. So we're going to continue on here. Speaking of Hersh, it's by Jonathan Cook. And this just came from Information Clearinghouse. Came out yesterday, right? Yeah, it came out yesterday. So, and Nikki and Jonathan Cook has a website called jonathan-cook.net. So, we have to thank the Information Clearinghouse for putting this out. Hersh's new Syria revelations buried from view. Veteran investigative journalist Seymour Hersh, the man who exposed the My Lai massacre during the Vietnam War and the U.S. military abuses of Iraqi prisoners in Abu Ghraib in 2004, is probably the most influential journalist in the modern era, with the possible exception of Bob Woodward and Cal Burstein, the pair who exposed Watergate. For decades, Hersh has drawn on his extensive contacts with the U.S. Secretary of Security establishment to bring us the story behind the official story and to disclose acts that have often proved deeply discomforting to those in power and exploded the self-serving fairy tale narratives the public were expected to passively accept as news. The stature among journalists was such that, in a sea of corporate media misinformation, he enjoyed a small island of freedom at the elite and influential outlet of the New Yorker. Paradoxically, over the past decade, as social media has created more democratic platform for information dissemination, the corporate media has grown ever more fearful of truly independent figure like Hersh. The potential reach of his story could now be enormously magnified by social media. As a result, he has been increasingly marginalized and his work denigrated. By denying him the credibility of a respectable mainstream platform, he can be dismissed for the first time in his career as a crank and charlatan, a purveyor of fake news. Nonetheless, despite struggling to find an outlet for his recent work, he has continued to scrutinize Western foreign policy, this time in relation to Syria. The official Western narrative has painted the picture of a psychotic Syrian president, Bashar Assad, who was assumed to be so irrational and self-destructive, he intermittently used chemical weapons against his own people. He does so not only for no obvious purpose, but this at moments when such attacks are likely to his regime untold damage. Notably, two sarin gas attacks have supposedly occurred when Assad was making strong diplomatic or military headway, and when the Islamic extremists Al-Qaeda and ISIS, his chief opponents, were on the back foot in a desperate need of outside intervention. Dangerous monsters. Hersh's investigations have only undermined evidence-free claims being promoted in the West to destabilize Assad's government, but threaten a wider U.S. policy, seeking to remake the Middle East his work, and has challenged a political and corporate media consensus that portrays Russia's Vladimir Putin, Assad's main ally against the extremist Islamic forces fighting in Syria, as another dangerous monster the West needs to bring into line. For all these reasons, Hersh has found himself increasingly friendless. The New Yorker refused to publish his Syria investigations. Instead, he had crossed the Atlantic to find a home at prestigious but far less prominent London Review of Books. Back in 2013, his contacts within the security and intelligence establishments revealed that the assumption Assad has ordered the use of sarin gas in Ghouta outside Damascus failed to stand up to scrutiny. Even Barack Obama's National Intelligence Director, James Clapper, was forced to admit privately that Assad's guilt was not a slam dunk, even as the media widely portrayed it as precisely that Hersh's work helped stymie efforts at the time to promote a Western military attack to bring down the Syrian government. His latest investigation questions whether Assad was responsible for another alleged gas attack, this one at Khan Shaykhun in April. Again, a consensual Western narrative was quickly constructed after social media showed dozens of Syrians dead, apparently following the dropping of a bomb by Syrian aircraft for the first time in his presidency. Donald Trump received wall-to-wall praise for launching a military strike on Syria in response, even though, as Hersh documents, he had no evidence on which to base such an attack on one that gravely violated international law. So all those folks that praised him for that, kind of, sort of, it's the only way, kind of, sort of, will get us through the day. Assumptionaholics Anonymous. Hersh's new investigation was paid for by the London Review of Books, which declined to publish it. It is almost as disturbing as the events in question. Whereas emerging is a media blackout so strong that even the London Review of Books is running scared. Instead of Hersh's story appeared yesterday in the German publication Welt am Sonntag. Well, it's an award-winning newspaper, no less serious than the New Yorker or the LRB. But significantly, Hersh is being forced to publish ever further from the centers of powers whose misinformation his investigations are challenging. Imagine how effective Woodward and Bernstein would have been bringing down Richard Nixon. They had been able to publish their Watergate investigations only in the French media. That is the situation we have reached now, where Hersh's efforts to scrutinize the West's self-serving claim about Syria. God bless the war on journalism. Hallelujah. U.S.-Russia cooperation. As for substance of Hersh's investigations, he finds that Trump launched 59 Tomahawk missiles at a Syrian air base in April, despite having been warned by the U.S. intelligence community that it found no evidence that the Syrians had used a chemical weapon. In fact, Hersh reveals that contrary to the popular narrative, the Syrian strike on a jihadist meeting place in Khan Shaykhun on April 4th was closely coordinated beforehand between Russian and U.S. intelligence agencies. The U.S. were well apprised of what would happen and tracked the events. Hersh's sources in the intelligence establishment point out that these close acts occurred for two reasons. First, there is a process known as deconfliction, designed to avoid collisions or accidental encounters between the U.S., Syrian, and Russian militaries, especially in the case of the supersonic jets. The Russian therefore supplied U.S. intelligence with precise details on that day's attack beforehand. But in this case, the coordination also occurred because the Russians wanted to warn the U.S. to keep away a CIA asset who had penetrated the jihadist group from that day's meeting. This was not a chemical weapon strike, a senior advisor to the U.S. intelligence community told Hersh. That's a fairy tale. If so, everyone involved in transferring, loading, and arming the weapon would be wearing hazmat protective clothing. In the case of a leak, there would be very little chance of survival without such gear. I've been saying that too, my friends. So, something to really look at, you know? You have to really pay attention. So, focus on face value. According to U.S. intelligence, Hersh reports the Syrian Air Force was able to target the site using a large conventional bomb supplies by the Russians. But if Assad does not use a chemical warhead, why did many people apparently die at Khan Shaykhun from inhalation of toxic gas? Thank you. The U.S. intelligence community says Hersh believes the bombs triggered secondary explosions in a storage depot in the building's basement that includes propane gas, fertilizers, insecticides, as well as rockets, weapons, and ammunition, and chlorine-based decontaminants for cleansing the bodies of the dead before burial. These explosions created a toxic cloud that was trapped close to the ground by the dense early morning air. Medicine Sans Frontieres found patients, if treated, smelled of bleach, suggesting that they had been exposed to chlorine. Sarin is odorless. Hersh concludes that evidence suggests that there was more than one chemical responsible for the symptoms observed, which would not have been the case of the Syrian Air Force, as opposition activists insisted, had dropped a Syrian bomb which has no percussive or ignition power to trigger secondary explosions. The range of symptoms is, however, consistent with a release of a mixture of chemicals, including chlorine and organophosphates, used in many fertilizers, which can cause neurotoxic effects similar to those of sarin. Political suicide. Hersh's main intelligence source makes an important contextual point you won't hear anywhere in the corporate media. What does occur to most Americans is that there has been a Syrian nerve gas authorized by Bashar Assad. The Russians would be 10 times as upset as anyone if in the West, Russia's strategy against ISIS, which involves getting American cooperation, would have been destroyed, and Bashar would be responsible for pissing off Russia with unknown consequences for him. Bashar would do that when he's on the verge of winning the war? Are you kidding me? When the U.S. national security officials planning Trump's retaliation asked the CIA what they knew of the events in Khan Shaykhon, according to Hersh's source, the CIA told them there was no residential delivery of sarin at Shirait, the airfield from which the Syrian bombers had taken off, and Assad had no motive to commit political suicide. The source continues. No one knew the provenance of the photographs of the attack's victims. We didn't know who the children were and how they got hurt. Sarin actually is very easy to detect because it penetrates paint, and all one would have to do is get a paint sample. We know there was a toxic cloud. We knew it hurt people, but you cannot jump from there to certainty that Assad had hidden sarin from the UN because he wanted to use it in Khan Shaykhon. Trump, under political pressure and highly emotional by nature, ignored the evidence, Hersh sources say. So he was like a bellboy. The president saw photographs of poisoned little girls and said it was Assad's atrocity. It's typical of human nature. You jump to conclusion you want. Intelligence analysts do not argue with the president. They're not going to tell the president if you don't interpret the data. This way I quit. Although Republicans, Democrats, and the entire media rallied to Trump's side for the first time, those speaking to Hersh have apparently done so out of fear for what may happen next. The danger of Trump's retaliatory strike based on zero evidence of a chemical weapons attack is that it could have killed Russian soldiers and dragged Putin into a highly dangerous confrontation with the U.S. Also, the intelligence community fears that the media have promoted a false narrative that suggests not only that a sarin gas took place, but paints Russia as a co-conspirator and implies that a UN team did not, in fact, oversee the destruction of Syria's chemical weapons stockpile back in 2013 to 2014. They would allow Assad's opponents to claim in the future, at a convenient time, yet another substantiated sarin gas attack by the Syrian government. Hersh concludes with words from his source that he should strike fear into all of us, to us all. The issue is, what if there's another false flag sarin gas attack credit to hated Syria? Trump has upped the ante and painted himself into a corner with the decision to bomb, and do not think these guys, Islamist groups, are not planning the next fake attack. Trump will have no choice but to bomb again and harder. He's incapable of saying he made a mistake. Update. As well as was to be expected, this has been a backlash against Hersh's investigation. If one thing is clear about Khan Shaykhon's incident, it is that, in the absence of an independent investigation, there is still no decisive physical evidence to settle yet what happened one way or another. Therefore, our job as observers should be to keep a critical distance and weigh other relevant issues such as context and probability. So let us set aside for a moment the specifics of what happened on April 4th and concrete instead on what Hersh's critics must concede. that they are to argue that Assad used sarin gas against the people of Khan Shikhan. That Assad is so crazed and self-destructive, or at the very least, so totally incapable of controlling his senior commanders, who must themselves be crazed and self-destructive. That he has, on several occasions, ordered the use of chemical weapons against civilians, and he has chosen to do it at the worst possible moments, for his own and his regime's survival, and when such attacks were entirely unnecessary. Two, that Putin is equally deranged and so willing to risk at end of times conflagration with the U.S. that he has on more than one occasion either sanctioned or turned a blind eye to the use of sarin by Assad's regime, and he has done nothing to penalize Assad afterwards when things went wrong. Three, that Hersh had decided to jettison all the investigatory skills he has amassed over many decades as a journalist to accept a face value any of substantial rumors his long-established contacts in the security services have thrown his way. And he has done so without regard to the damage that will do to his reputation and his journalistic legacy. Four, that a significant number of U.S. intelligence officials, those Hersh has known and worked with over a long period of time, have decided recently to spin an elaborate web of lies no one wants to print, either in the hope of damaging Hersh in some collective act or revenge against him, or in hope of permanently discrediting their own intelligence services. Critics do not simply have to believe one of these 4 points. They must maintain the absolute veracity of all 4 of them. And there's a video on here as well folks can check out yourselves. So it's like a little over 20 minutes long from the Real News. And they got some good episodes too. They got some good things. Some folks I'm not really too crazy about they bring in, but that's okay. But yeah, check out the video. And like I said before, my friends, it's always going to be this whole war on journalism as well. They're considered anyone as a critical thinker, regardless what you believe in, regardless where you're from. They consider you a terrorist in their own eyes, because you're not jumping on this bandwagon or any other New World Order agenda. So it just makes a lot of sense, and that's why Seymour Hersh, they're going to try to discredit him. But one thing we know for sure is going to backfire when more people take the initiative on looking at this and seeing the bigger picture and say hell no on the war in Syria. Bring all our troops home. Let our brothers and sisters protect the republic. Dismantle the corporation. Get rid of these central banksters and those bastards from the military-industrial complex. Not to say it's easy, but people got to start looking at those pinpoints. They don't give a damn if your son or daughter or brother and sister or niece and nephew go over there, they die in the line of battle, and for their war. Like I say, bring Nikki Haley in there. Let's see how tough she really is. Yeah, and I think I did a little bypass here. My mistake, but this one here. Little bypass. Yeah, it's not too bad here. Yeah, this one here came from the moon of Alabama. And it's an interesting claim, but I was like, I'm gonna use this as an interesting claim here. And this one's entitled White House says it will fake chemical attack in Syria. The White House claimed that the Syrian government is preparing chemical weapons attack. This is not clearly not the case. Syria is winning the war against the country. Any such attack will clearly be its disadvantage. The White House announcement must thereby be understood as a preparation for another U.S. attack in Syria in retaliation for an upcoming staged chemical weapon attack, which will be blamed by the Syrian government. Same old song and dance, right? In August 2013, Syria invited inspectors of the Organization for the Prohibition of chemical weapons to investigate chemical weapons attacks on the Syrian army. As soon as the inspectors arrived in Damascus, a chemical attack was staged in Ghouta, near Damascus. Lots of jihadists. Video coverage of killed children was published, and the Western media blamed the incident on the Syrian government. It never explained why targeting a militarily irrelevant area with the chemical weapons at the same time as inspectors arrived would have been a rational decision for a Syrian government that was just regaining control and international standing. The attack was clearly staged by the opposition of the Syrian government and its foreign supporters. The Obama administration had planned to use it to launch U.S. attacks on the Syrian government, but refrained from this when Russia arranged to remove Syria's strategic chemical weapons aimed at Israel instead. In early 2017, the U.S. Department, the new U.S. President Trump made positive comments about the Syrian government. Assad can stay, he said. The Syrian military and its allies had gained the upper hand and were victorious on all fronts. 2 days later, another chemical attack was staged, and the Al-Qaeda held town in Khan Shaykhom. Lots of jihadi video coverage of children, likely prepared in advance, was spilled onto the Western public. U.S. intelligence knew that no chemical attack by the Syrian government had taken place, but the Trump administration used the incident to launch a volley of cruise missiles against the Syrian military airport. Neoconservatives were delighted they finally had Trump where they wanted him. The media coverage changed from damning Trump for his alleged Russian connections to lauding his decisiveness in response to the fake attack. So, yes, this is very intriguing, I would say, right? So, one moment. Okay, so it says here in the early 2017, new President Trump made positive comments about the Syrian government. Assad can stay. The Syrian military and its allies have gained the upper hand and were victorious on all fronts. 2 days later, the chemical attack was staged, and Al-Qaeda held town of Khan Shaykhom. Lots of jihadi video coverage of killed children. They likely prepared in advance. Was spilled in the Western public. I know I'm repeating myself. Sorry about that, folks. U.S. intelligence knew that no chemical attack by the Syrian government had taken place, but the Trump administration used the incident to launch a volley of cruise missiles against Syrian military airport. Neoconservatives were delighted. They finally had Trump where they wanted him. By the cojones. The media coverage changed from damning Trump for his alleged Russian connections to lauding his decisiveness in response to the fake attack. Late May, the new French President Macron, ostensibly changed his position toward the Syrian government. The hostile position of France and other EU countries against the Syrian President Assad had been imminent throughout the last 6 years, change on a dime. Macron said that on Syria, my profound conviction is that we need a political and diplomatic roadmap. We won't solve the question only with the military force. This is a collective error we have made. The real change I made on this question is that I haven't said the deposing of Bashar al-Assad is a prerequisite for everything, because no one has introduced me to his legitimate successor. But Macron added, I had red lines on chemical weapons and humanitarian corridors. It is very clearly to Vladimir Putin, I will be uncompromising on that. So the use of chemical weapons will be met with a response even if France acts alone. All hail the empire. Macron, pull down your pants. Yahoo! That's right. He says, I'm ready for it, baby. Give it to me. I want him to put his pathetic rear end on the front line. See how tough these guys are. Come on. This immediately set off warning lights. Moon of Alabama at Munoz A. You like fakes. Tune into Macron announcing the next false flag chemical weapon attack in Syria. It looks like a Twitter page there. Like all red lines, this use on Macron set was an invitation to the Takfirists to launch more fake incidents. Others had a similar reaction to Macron's fake turnaround. The end of the war on Syria is in sight. One can start to tabulate the winners and losers. The U.S. military conceded that it had lost the race to occupy southeast Syria. All these in favor of Syria show that the war is practically won unless someone from the outside sponsor of the Takfiri rebels again escalate. Such an escalation is now happening. The White House claimed to have information that the Syrian government is preparing a chemical weapon attack to kill innocent children. In an ominous statement issued with no supporting evidence or further explanation, Press Secretary Sean Spicer said that the U.S. had identified potential preparation for another chemical weapons attack by the Assad regime that would likely result in mass murder of civilians, including innocent children. He said the activities were similar to preparations taken before an April 2017 attack that killed dozens of men, women, and children, and warned that if Mr. Assad conducts another mass murder attack using chemical weapons, he and his military will pay a heavy price. Woo! Now, as I continue on here, hold on, I just a little bit tongue-tied here. Yep, so, sorry about that. Several State Department officials typically involved in coordinating such announcements said they were caught completely off guard by warning which didn't appear to be discussed in advance with other national security agencies. Typically, the State Department, the Pentagon, the U.S. intelligence agencies would be all consulted before the White House issued a declaration to ricochet across foreign capitals. The White House claim is, of course, nonsense and not supported by any evidence or logic at all. But no one but the White House, not the State Department, no Defense Department seems to be informed about this, though it could be a ruse. 5 U.S. defense officials said they did not know what a potential chemical attack would come from and were unaware the White House was planning a statement. The lunatic U.S. ambassador to the UN jumped. Make it clear that it does not matter who commits whatever the crime in Syria, Africa, the U.S. or Israel. It will be the Syrian, Russian, Iranian governments who will be held guilty of it. And of course, she said that again on her Twitter page. Toss her ass in the front line, skank. A U.S. bomb attack on Islamic State used building in Madian, Syria, just killed 57 prisoners of the Islamic State. Will Nikki Haley hold the Syrian government responsible for this? Take note of Trump's schedule today. This came out yesterday, by the way. Laura Rosen. Trump has called with Francis Macron first thing in the morning before intel brief. Then meeting with National Security Advisor McMaster Bader. Yeah. Intense U.S. military reconnaissance takes place along the Syrian coast. Woo! The UK Defense Minister just announced that his government is in full agreement with the U.S. retaliation for a chemical attack in Syria. U.S. Secretary of Defense Mattis announced that the U.S. will continue to arm its Kurdish proxies in Syria even after ISIS is defeated. The war on terror continues. Hurrah, hurrah, hurrah. During the last 3 days, al-Qaeda attacks on Syrian army position near the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights were supported by Israeli air attacks. It is all clearly coordinated operation by the Western supporters of the Takfirists in Syria. Their aim is to prevent the victory of Syria and its allies. The U.S. wants to split up the country. Yes, God bless the New World Order. Imperialism is the only way. Woo, only way. Got a little cracked voice there. The announced fake chemical attack and the retaliation it is supposed to justify will likely happen in the southwest of Syria around Deira, where all recent attempts by Israel and the U.S.-supported Takfiris to dislodge the Syrian government forces have failed. The provocation now prepared and announced by Macron and the White House, supported by the UK, is probably planned to happen shortly before or during the upcoming G20 meeting in Hamburg. President Trump and members of his administration are requesting a full bilateral meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin at the G20 summit in Germany next month. While some administration officials have pressed for a quick pull-aside meeting at the Group of 20 summit, or lower officials talking privately instead of the heads of state, Trump wants an event that includes the media and time work for sessions, according to one government official. Trump has made a deal or war with Russia and announced fake chemical attack will be pressured against Putin. The neoconservatives in the administration want to break up Syria. It said Trump is tasked to get Russian agreement or that or else. Syria insists that has no chemical weapons or any intention to use any discriminating weapon. Russia warns of any further military aggression and calls such U.S. threats unacceptable. So if folks out there really gonna believe from Sputnik News, so a lot of these folks, you really gotta look at this. Okay, I don't know if the White House is actually gonna say it's gonna create a false flag attack, but one thing we know for sure is how long will this damn thing want? They want this thing to keep going and going and going and going. All right, and everyone's like, yes, we're fascists, but I'm free. I'm proud to be an American. I will sell my ass to the establishment. Something to really look at. And this is why foreign entanglements are extremely treacherous. I'm not going to rant like I said before mentioned on my last narration. But it's just one thing they want us to do. They want us to be dumb, stagnant, and happy. If they say bend over, they always go, how far, please? House and field peasants. You are a slave. Yes, boss, I'm your servant. Bend over. How far, boss? You want it wide as possible? Yeah, no problem, boss. This is what they want all of us to have that nature. The technocratic plantation is what it's called. So when you go out there, do your little peasant, little petty things, go, not my president, I'm angry at the world, and all you white people, all you black people are problems, and vice versa, and etc. You're just getting caught in their hoopla, and you're being consistently distracted. This is why, my friends, I've always been try to be organic. I network, but not fully involved with a lot of organizations. Like in activism and so forth. I see this little trend. But this is one thing I tell folks. Hands off of Syria. Hands off the world. They got to take care of their own affairs. I don't want to see this. We got to end the continuation of the Monroe Doctrine on steroids. Look it up, Monroe Doctrine, and you won't regret it. All right, so we're going to do another one here. All War, All Time, or War American Style by Rebecca Gordon. Headlines arrive in the inbox after the U.S.-led strikes in Syria kills hundreds of civilians, UN panel says. Pentagon wants to declare more parts of the world as temporary battlefields. The U.S. was supposed to leave Afghanistan by 2017. Now it might take decades. There are so many wars and rumors of war involving our country these days that it starts to feel a little unreal. Even for the most devoted of news watchers, and for many Americans, it's long been that way. For them, meaning of war is closer to reality TV than it is to reality. On a June day, you could, for instance, open the New York Times and read that airstrikes by the American-led coalition against Islamic State targets have killed hundreds of civilians around Raqqa, the militant group's last Syrian stronghold, and left 160,000 people displaced. Or you could come across statistics to orders of magnitude larger and learning from a variety of sources that famine is stalking 17 million people in Yemen. That is a predictable result of a Saudi Arabian proxy war against Iran, a campaign supported by the U.S. with weaponry and logistical assistance, in which, according to Human Rights Watch, the U.S. may well be very complicit in torture. You could contemplate the fact that in Iraq, a country the United States destabilized with this 2003 invasion occupation, there are still at least 3 million internally displaced people, according to the UN High Commission for Refugees, or that more than 411,000 Iraqis remain displaced from their homes in Mosul alone since Iraqi army launched a U.S.-backed offensive to drive ISIS out of that city last October. Yes, it is possible to click on those links or to catch so many other internet or TV news reports about such American or American-backed wars are damaging infrastructure, destroying entire healthcare systems, uprooting millions, and putting at risk the education of whole generations thousands of miles away, but none of it is real for most of us in this country. How could it be real? Most of us no longer have an idea of what war is like for the people who lived through it. No major war has been fought on U.S. territory since the Civil War ended in 1865. I still call it the Northern War from Northern Aggression, or the United States Confederate States War. And the last people who remember that terrible time died decades before the turn of the century. There is no around to give us a taste of that reality, except, of course, for the refugees that the Trump administration is now doing its best to keep out. In addition, Americans who once were mobilized to support their country's wars in distant lands, remember victory gardens on War Bonds Drive, are simply told to carry on with their lives as if it were peacetime, and the possibility of going to war. An army of citizens draftees has long been put to rest by America's all-volunteer military. As the U.S. battlefield expands, the need becomes ever greater for people in this country to understand the reality of war, especially now that we have a president from the world of reality TV. During the second half of the 20th century, Congress repeatedly ceded its constitutional power to declare war to successive executive administrations. At the moment, however, we have in Donald Trump a president who appears to be bored with those purloined powers and with the very idea of civilian control over the military. In fact, our feckless commander-in-chief seems to be handing over directly to that military all power to decide when and where this country sends its troops or launches its missiles from drones. Now that our democratic connection to the wars fought in our name has receded yet one more step from our lives and any civilian role in war, accepting, thanking, and praising the warriors. It's fading into the history books. Isn't it about time to ask them questions about the very nature of reality and of those wars? Of course. War from the civilian point of view. We think of wars reasonably enough as primarily affecting the soldiers engaging in them, the young men and women who fight, some as volunteers and some who choose military service over unemployment and poverty, do sometimes die in our wars. Even if they survive, as we now know, their bodies and psyches often bear the lifelong scars of the experience. Indeed, I've met some of these former soldiers in the college philosophy classes I teach. There was a Hersh Army sniper who sat in the back of the classroom, his left leg constantly bouncing up and down. The explosion of a roadside bomb had broken his back and left him in constant pain. But the greatest source of his suffering, as he told me, was the constant anxiety that forced him on many days to walk out halfway through the class. Then there was a young man who served in Baghdad and assured me if anyone fought in Afghanistan or Iraq and they say they came back whole, they're either lying or they just haven't realized yet what had happened to them. And there were the young men who told the class that in fear they had to move out of their homes because their boyfriends came back from the wars as dangerous young men, and they no longer recognized. If we in this country know anything about real war, it's from the people like these, from members of the military or those close to them. But we can only get the most partial understanding of war from veterans and their families. In fact, most people affected by modern wars are not soldiers at all. Somewhere between 60 and 80 million people died during World War II. More than 60% of them were civilians. They died as victims of the usual horrific acts of war or outright war crimes or crimes against humanity. A familiar number succumbed to war-related disease and famine. It includes millions in place, and most Americans don't even think of as major sites or that war horrors, China, India, French Indochina, and the Dutch East Indies, and of course, close to 6 million Poles, most of them Jews, along with at least 16 million Soviet civilians died in the brutal Nazi invasion and attempted occupation of the major parts of the Soviet Union. And that hardly tells the tally of civilians devastated by war. Another 60 million people became displaced or refugees in its wake, forever torn from their homes. So what is war like for people who live where it happens? We can't find out a reasonable amount about those if we want to. It is not hard to dig up personal accounts of such experiences in past wars. But what can we know now about civilians living throughout our country's current war and Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, or Yemen? There are 2 personal accounts are available, but you have to go searching. Certainly it is possible, for instance, to learn something about the deaths of 200 people in the school hit by a single U.S. airstrike in the Syrian city of Raqqa. But that can't make us feel unendurable, inescapable pain of a human being crushed in the collapse of that one school. It can't make us hear the screams at the moment or later smells the stench of decomposing dead. You have to be there to know that reality. Still, daily life in a country at war isn't all screams and stench. A lot of times it's just ordinary existence, but experienced with kind of double awareness. On the one hand, you send your children to school, walk to the market to do your shopping, go out to your fields to plow or plant. On the other, you know that at any moment your ordinary life can be interrupted, ended, in fact, by forces over which you have no control. That's what it was like for me during the months I spent, as my partner likes to say, trying to get myself killed in somebody else's country. In 1984, I worked for 6 months in the war zones of Nicaragua as a volunteer for Witness for Peace. In 1979, the Sandinista movement had led a national insurrection, overthrowing the U.S.-backed dictator Anastasio Somoza. In response, the U.S. had funded the counter-revolutionaries or Contras, who, by the time I arrived, had launched a major military campaign against the Sandinistas. Under the CIA direction, they had adopted a military strategy for sabotaging government services, including rural health clinics, schools, and phone lines, and terrorizing civilian people with murders, kidnapping, torture, and mutilation. My job was simple: to visit the towns and villages they had attacked and record the testimony of the survivors. In the process, for instance, I talked to a man whose son had been hacked into so many pieces he had to bury him in the field where he had been left. I met children of a 70-year-old man. A week after Contras flayed him alive, slicing the skin off his face. I talked to the mayor of a town in northern Nicaragua whose parents were kidnapped and tortured to death by the Contras. The original dream of WFP was somewhat more grandiose than collecting horror stories. American volunteers were to provide a shield of love for Nicaraguans threatened by the U.S.-supported Contras. The territory was that they might be less inclined to attack a town if they knew the U.S. citizens were in the area, lest they bite the hand that was, however, callously feeding them. In reality, the Sandinistas are unwilling to put guests like me at risk that way, and far from being a shield. In times of danger, we were sometimes an extra liability. In fact, the night of the Contras surrounded Jalapa, where I was staying for a few weeks. The town's mayor sent a couple of soldiers with guns to the guardhouse of the American pacifists. So much for what was shielding whom. On that particular night, the Nicaraguan army confronted the Contras before they made it to Jalapa, where we could hear the battle in the distance, but it never threatened the town itself. All that day, we've been digging to help build Jalapa's refugio, an underground shelter to protect children and old people in the cause of aerial attack. Other town residents have been planting trees on the diluted hillsides where Somoza had allowed U.S. and Canadian lumber companies to clear-cut growth forests. This was dangerous work. Tree plants were favorite Contra targets, but most people in town were simply going about their ordinary lives, working in the markets, washing clothes, fixing cars, while the loudspeakers on the edge of sound blared news about the latest Contra kidnappings. This was living in a war zone can be like. You plant trees that might take 20 years to mature, knowing that at the same time that you might not survive at night. Keep in mind that my experience was limited. I wasn't a Nicaraguan. I could leave whenever I chose. After those 6 months, I did go home. The Nicaraguans were home. In addition, the scale of that war was modest compared to the present wars across the greater Middle East, and Nicaraguans were fortunate to escape some of the worst effects of a conflict fought in the agricultural society. So often, war makes planting and harvesting too dangerous to undertake, and when the agricultural cycle is interrupted, people began to starve. In addition, it was short enough that, although the Contras intentionally targeted schools and teachers, an entire generation did not lose their education, and it's happening now in parts of the greater Middle East. Many rural Nicaraguans lack electricity and running water, so there was no great harm done when Safulalu, the electricity was cut off, as often happened when the Contras attacked a power generator. Worse was when Sifulagua, the water in people's homes, the communal pumps stopped running, often as a result of the Contra attack on a pumping station or the destruction of water pipes. Still, for the most part, these were unpleasant inconveniences in a rural society where electricity and running water were not yet all that common and where people knew how to make the do without. Imagine instead that you lived in a major Middle Eastern city, said Ramadi, Fluhula, Mosul, or Aleppo are partially or nearly totally reduced to rubble, or even a city like Baghdad that, despite constant suicide bombings, is still functioning. Their life, of course, is organized around modern infrastructure that brings light, power, and water into your home. The United States, unless you live in Flint, Michigan, it's hard to grasp what it might be like to have a potable water dependently spilling out of the faucet. Suppose you got up one morning and your phone hadn't charged overnight. The light switches had all stopped working. You couldn't toast your Pop-Tarts, and there was no hope of a cup of coffee because there was no water. No water that day or the next day or the other after. Or what would you do after bottled water was gone from the stores? What would you do as you watch your kids grow weak from thirst? Where would you go? When would you when you knew you'd die if you remained in the familiar place that had been so long been your home? What in fact would you, if opposing armed forces as most of the cities mentioned above, fought it out in your very neighborhood? Reality or reality TV? I've been teaching college students for over a decade. I now face students who have lived their entire conscious lives in a country, as we are told, is at war. They've never known anything else since the moment in 2001 when George W. Bush declared global war on terror. But their experience of this war, like my own, is less reality and more reality TV. Their iPhones work. Their water and light in their homes are fine. Their screens on day or night. No one bombs their neighborhoods. They have no citizenly duty to go into the military. Their lives are no different due to the war, or rather wars, their countries fighting in their name in distant lands. Theirs, then, is the strangest of wars, one without sacrifice. Its lack of the ration books, the blackouts, the shortages my parents' generation experienced during World War II. It lacks the fear that an enemy army will land on our coast or descend from our skies. None of us fear that war will take place, will take away our food, electricity, water, or most precious of all, our Wi-Fi. For us, if we think about them all, that sense of distance conflicts is only an endless make-believe war, the one that might as well be taking place another planet in another universe. Of course, in a sense, it is inaccurate to say we sacrifice nothing. The poorest among us, in fact, sacrifice the most living in the country, willing to put almost any sum into the Pentagon and its wars, but unable to afford to provide the basic entitlements enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights: light, food, clothing, housing, education, not to speak these days of infrastructure. What could the U.S. government do for health, education, and general well-being of its people if it weren't devoting more than half the country's discretionary spending in the military? There's something else we haven't had to sacrifice, though: peace of mind. We don't have to carry in our consciousness the effects of those wars on our soldiers, on our military adversaries, or on the millions of civilians whose bodies or lives have been mangled in them. Those effects have been largely airbrushed out of our mental portrait of a Pax Americana world. Our understanding of our country's endless wars has been sanitized, manipulated, and packaged for our consumption the way producers manipulate and package the relationships of participants on reality TV shows like The Bachelor. If Vietnam was the first televised war, then the 1991 Gulf War against Saddam Hussein's Iraq was the first video game-style war. Who couldn't forget the haunting green images of explosions over Baghdad on that first night, even if they've forgotten the 50 decapitation strikes against the Iraqi leadership that killed not one of them but dozens of civilians? Who could forget the live broadcast streamed from video cameras attached to a smart bomb, or the time the two of them demolished what turned out to be a civilian air raid shelter, killing more than 200 people hiding inside? Who could forget those live reports from CNN that gave us the illusion that we were almost there ourselves and understood just what was seemingly unfolding before our eyes? In fact, the University of Massachusetts study later found that more people watched TV during the Gulf crisis the less they knew about the underlying issues, the more likely they were to support the war. Even if we did understand the underlying issues, did we understand sorry about that, what it's like to find yourself trapped under the rubble of our own house? During almost 16 years of war since the attacks on 9/11, The mystification of the home front has only grown as the tensions have wandered, and some of our ongoing wars as in Afghanistan had been largely forgotten. Our enemies change regularly. Who even remembers Al-Qaeda and Iraq, or that it became the Islamic State? Who remembers when we were fighting Al-Qaeda-inspired al-Nusra Front, or even that we ever fighting them? Instead of welcoming its militants into alliance against Bashar al-Assad in Syria, the enemies may rotate, but the wars only continue to spread like so many metastasizing cancer cells. Even as the number of wars expand, however, they seem to grow less real to us here in the United States. So it becomes ever more important that we, in whose those wars are being pursued, make the effort to grasp their grim reality. It's important to remind ourselves that war is the worst possible way of settling human disagreements. Focus as in upon injuring human flesh and ravaging the basics of human life until one side can no longer withstand pain. Worse yet, as those almost 16 years since 9/11 show, our wars have caused endless pain and settled no disagreements at all. In this country, we don't have to know that in American war, real people's bodies are torn apart, real people die, and real cities are being turned to rubble. We can watch interviews with survivors of the latest strikes on the nightly news and catch the latest episode of Azareth's suffering on Survivor. After a while, it becomes hard for many of us to tell or even to care which is real, which is only reality TV. Interesting quote commentary from Rebecca Gordon, who's a Dispatch regular, by the way. That's right, my friends. We have to look at things into a bigger picture. I'm against these wars, and I'm already opposing the upcoming battle. Whether it's tomorrow or 20 years from now. So, folks over there, folks out here, or listening, let that sink in. What Miss Gordon has to say. When you get caught in the hoopla, then you're just been numbered. If you're critical, you folks know what to do. Spread the word of truth. All right, so this one here now is non-war related. Came out a couple days ago by The Verdict. And this one was written by Marcy A. Hamilton. The silence of children locked away in the secret archives of the Archdiocese of New York City under criminal law. New York lawmakers last week closed their 2017 session in legislative hell, as one senator called, without resolving a number of important issues, including Child Victims Act, which would reform New York's antiquated child sex abuse statute of limitations. It would extend civil and criminal SOLs, revive expired civil SOLs for 1 year, and eliminate the notice of claims requirement that has hobbled public school victims' access to justice. Governor Andrew Cuomo has endorsed the concept earlier in the year, making him the first state governor to step forward before being asked to sign such a bill. While the Assembly had passed a version and the Senate appeared to have a majority to vote for it, Senate Majority Leader John Flanagan, on the last day of the session, blocked its progress from committee to the floor. The New York situation is brilliantly summarized and parodied by Samantha B. here. So it's parodied. Let's see what it has to say. Yeah, you can actually see it for yourself from Slate.com. Yeah, I definitely check it out. So I'm going to continue on here. So what does survivors do who has been put through a ringer by the New York legislative process over a decade and who had just said Senator Flanagan unilaterally shut down their hopes again? Naturally, they picket the ninth hole of the Trump National Golf Course for Flanagan's holding a political fundraiser at $1,500 a head. Survivors are where they need to be, speaking the truth to power. And the truth makes Flanagan complicit in the cover-up of information about pedophiles the public desperately needs. Now, it is no surprise at this point that an Irish Catholic Republican senator will carry the Catholic bishop's water on child sex abuse, but everyone knows that the bill is going to pass sooner or later. New York has some of the worst SOLs in the country, and even Irish Catholic Republican politicians can agree that child sex abuse is really bad and hiding predators terrible. This is not all about the past. SOL reforms helps children in the present tense because it identifies child predators who are still operating in the silence afforded them when the system gags victims with expired SOLs. When I first started thinking and writing about this issue over 15 years ago, the term of statute of limitations routinely met with the blank stare, as in, what are you talking about? And more importantly, why? It was legalese. By 2011, however, when the Penn State Jerry Sandusky scandal hit, audience were savvy that it is just a deadline for filing a lawsuit or pressing charges, and that it frequently re-victimizes victims by sending the message that the injuries are not worthy of the legal system's time. So what accounts for the New York Senate's obstinate refusal to take up the issue? The answer, of course, lies in the lobbyists. Some have said that the opponents to the CVA lurked in the shadows this year, but no one needs a college degree to know that the most ardent and active opposition comes from the Catholic bishops, and it is equally clear why they were lurking rather than lobbying salvos into public square, why the bishop have taken their opposition to SOL reform ground. The problem for the Catholic bishops on SOL reform is that all the arguments against SOL reform do not hold water. They say there will be an avalanche of cases. Not so. Even opening a generous window where victims can sue for several years, even if their SOL has already expired, regardless of when the abuse occurred, does not result in a large number of cases. In each state to open and revive SOLs, the numbers of lawsuits have been modest. They say there are many false claims that will be unfair to them, not according to the facts. No false claims have made it into the courts where windows have been opened, as this chart summarizes. They say there will be no evidence from cases long ago, therefore they will be at a disadvantage. If I hear memories fade and evidence is lost, one more time, but in fact, the bishops have done some of the great record-keeping on priests' sexual assaults on children. Their secret archives, which are described here, there's a link for that, have held and still hold much information is needed to prove up a case against a priest, bishop, or a diocese. They say that they will go bankrupt because of the many cases and payouts. There is no cause and effective relationship between SOL reform and diocese bankruptcies. I'll continue on here. Not all windows have led to bankruptcies, and not all bankruptcies have followed SOL reform. In the event, what they mean by bankruptcy is Chapter 11, which is a federal bankruptcy provision so that businesses can protect their assets from creditors. Not Chapter 7 result in liquidation of the entity. Besides, they use bankruptcy to reduce the amount they must pay for damages to each victim and to flush out as many victims as possible to avoid any future claims. No other legal mechanism makes it possible to force victims into the light before they are ready. They said that social services will suffer, yet tax dollars support 78% of Catholics' charities, social services, and they are the largest landowner in the United States. The land and property rights owned by the New York Archdiocese is worth billions. Of course, they're a business. They're a state church. They follow on a 501c3, just an example. They used to say that SOLs are very important for predictability and reliability in the law. That argument fell aside for the New York bishops, though, because they are now endorsing complete elimination of the civil and criminal SOLs, which just proves that their other arguments don't hold water. The only SOL reform that bothers them is now in the window. Finally, they say it is unconstitutional to revive expired civil SOLs that one really can't fly in New York, where lawmakers keep passing SOL windows for other people. Their arguments are simply too flimsy at this point to try out in public. They circulate them behind closed doors, though, and for some members, facts don't always matter, that they can deliver a favor to the church. Given that there is a solid answer to teach in every one of their arguments against SOL reform, let's try to figure out what exactly is bothering the New York bishops so much that they will sink millions into lobbying against the window. The real reason for the Timothy Dolan Finding Child Victims Act, with every bit of political power he has, contents of his secret archive. The actual reason Cardinal Dolan is financing the fight against SOL and reform in New York is, quote, obvious. There are secrets in his secret archives that will curl your hair, based on every other diocese in the United States and the large Catholic population in New York. We know that there must be hundreds of abusing priests not yet named publicly. If the New York abusers are like general population, that they may well have 100 victims apiece, meaning that we are talking about thousands of events. About 43 have been named publicly so far. The difference between a state with a window and without is that the defendants are forced to produce documents that we would otherwise like to keep secret under a window. We don't know about the other New York priests because the short statute of limitations meant few cases, even less discovery. In the states with generous SOLs, a heart or window, the public has learned the ugly secrets in the archives only because the courts have forced the information to the public through discovery. A lawsuit is the only leverage a victim has to force those secrets into light. Cardinal Dolan established a compensation fund for victims, and Brooklyn's Bishop DiMarzio have followed suit. These are good developments because victims do deserve an opportunity to have the cost of the abuse shifted from the shoulders to the institution that caused it. Also, to the bishop's credit, there is no requirement of secrecy or confidentiality to receive compensation from the diocese for their injuries. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. There are few loopholes in these compensation funds, though the bode ill for many victims. They don't discover priests who were part of a religious order as opposed to being a diocesan priest. Even though the Archdiocese or diocese always has control over any priest in its jurisdiction. So if you were abused by a Christian priest or Jesuit, good luck in New York. They also won't pay if you don't have independent proof, and they do not offer their secret archives on your perpetrator either. So if you don't have that kind of proof on your own, they are likely to deny you, as they have for some of the victims whose claims ring true. This is the most important point because they are mediations rather than litigation. The victim cannot obtain discovery. Litigation shifts the cost to the cause of the harm and educates the public on the truth. The compensation funds make it possible for the bishops to say they are helping the victims while they unilaterally deny others and while they keep most of their secrets intact. What secrets must be locked away in those New York archives? So let's recap. 1. Their arguments against the window are not hot air. 2. They are willing to pay compensation to victims for the harm, but not in the litigation. Only through their own mediation system, which does not include sharing of any files from the secret archives. 3. They are still fighting tooth and nail against the window. What is it? What are they fighting for? The only thing they still have control over is secrets in their files. They must be extraordinary. Given the millions of payments to Halt Child Victims Act, can only wonder how much worse than they are than the secrets released in other parts of the country. E.g., could New York also have a case involving child sex abuse of hundreds of deaf boys at the boarding school for the deaf, as in Wisconsin, or as an unsolved death of a nun who is a likely whistleblower on sexual abuse by a prolific pedophile priest, a la the Keepers, which I discussed here? Or could the cardinal know that there is an active priest with thousands of child porn images on his computer? Or could the Archdiocese be harboring priests brought in for treatment like the hundreds of priests accused of sexual misconduct, with many involving children who were sent to the Order of Paracletes in New Mexico, where they would staff masses for the local churches, which grant them yet another opportunity to abuse more children? Or have an active elderly priest still abusing children in the diocese? Or could there be many priests as brutal and disgusting as Brisky and Cudemo in Philadelphia, who were defrocked by now roam freely because the Archdiocese kept it what it knew from the public? There's little doubt there are similar stories and more locked away in those archives. The Child Victims Act of New York will pass and will include a window, and we will learn from the horrific secrets now locked away in the Cardinal Dolan secret archive. Until then, all we have is our imagination to conjure up how awful those secrets are. Wow, that's all I have to say. It is a good commentary from Miss Hamilton. Just an example of why I got some sick puppies out there. Very distorted individuals. How many people have been unjustified? This is just a prime example of child abuse, sexual child abuse, child trafficking, all in the same category. This is one thing I know for sure. If they go out of business, who the hell cares? That's how I see it. So, I'm like lost for words, and I do apologize for that. But somebody just likes to try to use a lot more decorum with these issues. But it will. I do support it. People in New York, push it. Make it happen. Even if you have to punch Governor Cuomo in the mouth and the other lack is trying to hold back on it. Just go in there, punch him in the damn mouth. Because that's the only language you can understand. Or not ridicule them everywhere you go. Because they're supposed to serve you, not the other way around. And even with the Roman Catholic institution, their secret archives, trying to protect the priests, not the children. You're nothing more than scumbags, as far as I'm concerned. You're not holy. You're blasphemous parasites. Those are your attributes, not mine. Deep down inside, you know I'm right. All right, folks, that's it. I thank everyone for listening. Plus, feel free to download and share us throughout your social media networks. If you have any questions, comments, or even send me something that's interesting you may want to check out, whatever you do, please address your correspondence with decorum. You can hit me on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, Breaker, iHeartRadio, Tumblr, YouTube, Scene.life, Minds.com, Freedoms Network, FutureNet.club, and Patreon.com. If you want to donate money and put your comments there as well, /LokiLuck3, which is 3 I's. In addition, you can email me at LokiLuck3, which is the number 3 and all together at gmail.com, or you cryptic ones, LokiLuck03 at protonmail.com. All right, my friends, thank you for your time. Plus, always remember that demoniac resistance is healthy for the soul and can liberate humanity. Until next time, take care of yourselves, keep on spreading the love, and may your guardian spirits be with you.